keynote speakers, Carol and Dave White with us. They were here, I think, back in 2006, so it's nice to have their return. They're no strangers to ADK or the hiking community. They have a lot of accomplishments in that. Excuse me. Okay, Scott. So we'll see how this goes. Our presenters, really a lot of accomplishments in the hiking area. They're both long-time winter 46ers, winter Catskill 35ers. They've hiked 48 of the White Mountains in the winter, and they're hiked all of the Northeast 111. And 8 of the 14,000 high peaks in Colorado. Carol has compiled and edited a number of books, of which there's 3 peak experience books, Catskill Peak Experiences. Jackson? Catskill Peak Experiences, Adirondack Peak Experiences. And the latest is just called Peak Experiences, which is a combination of a lot of the people's experiences in the White Mountains and Adirondacks and Catskills. In addition, Carol has edited Women with Altitude, another favorite, and edited the ADK Trails guidebook. She's written Catskill Day Hikes for all seasons, and plus a number of articles for Adirondack Magazine, and other publications. In 2003 through 2007, Carol served as on the executive board of ADK and chairs the Catskill 3500 Club Conservation Committee. In 2007, Carol received the Susan B. Anthony Legacy Award at a conference at the U of R. She was one of 3 women that received that award, and the conference was called Daring the Impossible, Strong Women Take on the World. So gentlemen, take note. Dave is the membership chair of the Catskill 3500 Club, and it's a position very much like that of Grace Sadowski. And at the completion of the 35, when a hiker completes his winter or regular 35s and sends in his tally sheet with comments, Dave puts together a really very special letter, and I mean really special. I had one a few years ago. Takes the time to really personalize it for each individual hiker. I mean, it is special. I believe, Dave, you were director in ADK for about eight years? Yeah. In 2011, both Carol and Dave assisted National Geographic Society in creating the the latest trail map of the Catskill Park. And in 2013, I believe it was at the President's dinner or talk, they received the Eleanor F. Brown ADK Communications Award. So anyway, a lot of accomplishments there. On a personal note, when I first started to do some of the hiking in the Catskills, I really didn't know anybody at that time, and I found through Carol's book, Catskill Peak Experiences, it really was, not only did I learn about other people's experiences hiking those mountains, but things to look out for as well as I continued on to that journey. And then a few years ago, Carol and Dave and I were in Lake Placid, and I can recall it was early in November. Dave and I hiked up Phelps Mountain. There was, I think, a couple feet of snow at that time. And Dave had been up to Phelps a number of times, but he told me this was the first time that he was up there and actually had a view. So it was great to be along with him. So kind of a treat. And they both introduced me to a real gem of a mountain up there. It's not a high peak, but we climbed Owl's Head off of Route 73. And it's a mountain I've been back to a number of times and shared with friends of mine. So they've been good friends of mine for a number of years, and I'd like to now introduce Carol and Dave White, our presenters for the evening.
So much fun to be here with this wonderful chapter. Adirondack Peak Experiences are the What Not to Do books. So let's dive right in. As we show you these slides, think about just these 5 principles that we learned when we started hiking the 48 high peaks in New Hampshire. And this was put together by the search and rescue people in the White Mountains. And they just came up with these 5 things. You obviously learn about the terrain and the equipment and the weather. Particularly, I think the most important thing in any mountaineering, any season, is to check the local weather. So you can just go on NOAA.gov or some other and find out what the local weather is. And tell somebody, if you're doing it alone or even as a couple, you know, the trails that you'll hike and when you expect to return. But while I'm thinking about this, I'd like you to just tell the story about how we told Dave's business partner that we were going to do a 20-mile round-trip hike to Allen Mountain in the winter.
So, of course, we told him where we were going, and when we got back home, I called up Jim and I said, "We're home." And he said, "Oh, I forgot you were going." So he's no longer my business partner.
So yeah, in a group, stay together and pace the hike to the slowest person. If you've ever tried to lead a hike, that is nearly impossible. You know, most of the people we talk to say that's incredibly hard to do. So if anybody has any words of wisdom on that one, let us know. And just turning back is really critical, not only checking the local weather, but turning back. If any conditions, either in yourself, the weather, whatever, be prepared to turn back, because I'm going to give you a story about 2 men that hiked Mount Washington on June 30th, and one was the founder of the New York City Athletic Club, who was the bottom line expert on all things athletic, and was killed in an ice storm because they didn't turn back. Yeah, it was June 30th. So, And so any injury or wrong turn can be life-threatening. So you have to know how to rescue yourself. You might have read about Ann Curry recently that broke her leg, as it turned out, and was saved by scouts down Bear State Park. And one of the stories in Peak Experiences is about a man who was climbing Madison Mountain, 5,000 footer in the wintertime, and he decided to turn around at some point, and he broke his leg, and he got himself safely down many hundreds of feet. Not sure whether people know how to rescue themselves or not, but think about all these things as we show you the pictures. Okay, this is going to be our climb of Mount Washington, and let's see. Yeah. Just want to tell you the facts about Mount Washington. It's dubbed the Killer Mountain, and one reason is that the top wind speed is 231 miles per hour. The average temperature on Mount Washington is 27 degrees. Average temperature. That's year-round. And the reason for that is because the summer temperatures very seldom get above the low 50s, and the temperature on Mount Washington has only twice reached 72 degrees. So, and the winter summit low is minus 47 degrees, with highs only in the teens. So the average temperature is 27. And so if you go up on Mount Washington in a car, and it's in 50 degrees, and it's 25-mile-an-hour wind speed, which is the average speed in July, it's 44 miles an hour in January, then it's going to be incredibly cold. You won't be able to spend very much time outside at all. So when you contemplate climbing Mount Washington in the wintertime, you have to be aware of these things. And our anniversary happens to be on January 16th. And in 2004, the temperature on Mount Washington was minus 43.6 degrees. The wind speed was 87, steady 87 miles per hour. And the wind chill was minus 103. So we decided not to celebrate our anniversary on Mount Washington. But we did climb it in late December.
Yeah, the secret is to climb it when the wind speed is lower than the temperature. So you want a high temperature and a low wind speed. So here's what it looks like in winter.
Tuckerman Ravine. And somebody was telling us that the ski season, did you tell us, Jim? If you're...
Those are people there.
Yeah. That your son went to... Yeah. His son, a week ago, skied Tuckerman Ravine. April is the big ski season. Okay, here. Yeah. So, you can tell me what it is.
So this is called Lion Head. And if Carol's going to point to the mouth.
There's the mouth, the nose. This is the profile looking and the mane. This is 5,500 feet up Mount Washington. And there it is in summer. Summer, there's the mouth, nose, mane. Okay, this is above Tuckerman Ravine.
Notice the spikes, of course, on the feet.
So it's another 1,000 feet up the summit cone here. Nobody's driving up. Okay. So, this is somebody that hiked the entire Appalachian Trail with a tuba. because he absolutely can't contemplate spending 4 months without his tuba. And so he put his sleeping bag in the bell of the tuba. We're fine. Yeah. Oh, the tuba's name is Charisma, by the way. And, while I'm thinking of it, this tuba actually saved his life, because when he got down into Pennsylvania, he fell off a 20-foot cliff, and the tuba, 10 foot down, he fell into the tuba, it was dented, and then he fell another 10 feet, but he thinks that Charisma absolutely saved his life. So, in the next... So when he got back, he and his wife had a baby boy. Okay. So if you went up the road to Mount Washington, this is the halfway point at about 5,500 feet. And maybe you've heard of Guy Waterman. He wrote several important books with Laura Waterman about the whites. And they have a few emergency shelters that are 7 feet by 7 feet. And they were trapped in the emergency shelter from December 31st to January 3rd. Because the winds on Mount Washington in that period of time were at least 100 miles an hour, gusts up to 150 miles an hour, and it was minus 26 on January 1st. So the wind chills are just off the charts, and they literally could not move out except to get some water from the icy cornices nearby. Yeah, just rye mice. We'll show you some other examples of rye mice on the summit of Mount Washington. So the expedition into the northern presidentials, this is one of the most dangerous places in America. Well over 100 people have been killed on Mount Washington in the presidential range.
A lot of those were killed going up the Cog Railway or on the road. So.
Not a lot. No, not a lot. Okay. So we took different trails up to the winter presidentials. This is the expedition to Adams, which is 5,774 feet. And usually about the same winds as Mount Washington. Mount Washington in the background. And one of the stories in Mount Adams is so amazing. It's we took the absolute shortest trail, so it's only 4 miles to the summit of Adams by going up the airline trail. But some other people had packed into the Grey Knob cabin, which is within 1.7 miles of Adams overnight. And then they climbed 1.7 miles, and a whiteout descended on the northern presidentials, and they got completely disoriented, and they had to be rescued, and they were not found until 1 o'clock the next morning, only because there were some really expert people that knew the trails like the back of their hands, and they finally saw some crampon marks, an icy section, but other than that, they wouldn't probably have been found. So this is between Adams and Jefferson.
And those of you who are familiar with cairns, this is certainly the largest cairn that you're likely to find.
So this is the airline trail to Mount Adams. Same picture. Now that looks very benign, but the wind could have been 35 to 40 miles an hour. Like the watermen say, you know, prepare for full Arctic weather. Bring every conceivable gear you can think of. So one man hiked them all of them without ever getting provisions on the way. And he did 10 push-ups on every single summit. Okay, can you read that? It says, this area ahead has the worst weather in America. Many have died there from exposure, even in the summer. Turn back now if the weather is bad. So the sign is above my head. And it is, it's weather comparable, I would say, really, to, I don't know, the Himalayas. Yeah. Now we're on Mount Adams, and there's the hut down there. That was built in 1888, the first hut.
And there's 8 huts in the White Mountains.
But one of the interesting things is, well, after I go into the next section of the Southern Presidentials where these athletes got killed, after they got killed, they built the second hut in 1915. And it was completed in July. And in September, just 2 months later, 6 hikers were stranded 4 days at this hut. And it just makes you wonder, without this hut, what would they have done? And so then the Mizpah hut, which is nearby, farther down the Southern Presidentials, was built in 1965. But it's kind of an ironic thing that people make reservations to stay in the Mizpah hut, and then the Lake of the Clouds hut, and then the Madison hut, several miles. And so you've got reservations at all these places, and you figure, well, I'm going to make it, I'm going to do it. I have reservations. And the weather can change completely. So it almost becomes a dangerous thing to have the huts. Interesting. Moose bones. Code. And he was found dead at the base of Mount Monroe, about a mile from the summit of Mount Washington, thinly clad of hypothermia, obviously, just to call it frozen to death, exposure. But the thing is, they had just put a new trail in, and I'll show you as we go along. They started by hiking Mount Willard. This is on Crawford Notch. This is on June 30th, and this is a 3.2-mile round-trip hike before they ever started on the Crawford Path to Mount Washington. And the reason they were going to the summit of Mount Washington was because it was the 3rd meeting of the Appalachian Mountain Club that they decided to have on the summit of Mount Washington. And the Crawford Path is 8.2 miles, but if you go up over some of the summits, it's 8.6 miles, to which they added 3.2 miles. And up here on Mount Willard, which isn't even on, the path to Mount Washington, you would have seen weather on Mount Washington. Then, coming back down, you would have to go past the Crawford House, where they were in regular contact with Mount Washington even back then. And they could have found out the weather report that some kind of very sinister storm was coming in. So they could have known that. So this is about 1.7 miles up near the first peak on the Crawford Path. And that's Mount Eisenhower. And Mount Washington is their goal. And here we are in the winter at the same spot.
So really, in winter, I'm clad less than they needed to be in June 30th. But you never can tell.
Yeah, because we always wait for really good weather, so that we're up here and you're going to be pretty exposed, but we waited for sunny, relatively warm winter days. That's the critical thing. Okay, this is the Mizpah hut that I told you was built in 1965. Wait a minute, go back. Go back just a second for that, yeah. So this is the path up Mount Eisenhower, having come from Mount Clinton. They have big cairns at least, so you don't get lost. And there's some more of the nice rime ice formations. That's a really good one. So the path we decided to take to climb Mount Monroe is the Edmonds path between Eisenhower and Mount Washington. So let's look at that for a minute. So there's Mount Washington and Mount Monroe up there. So we're going to be climbing where the Curtis and Ormsby went, up here. This is the base of Mount Eisenhower, where they could have gone down the path that we came up. It had just been refurbished, not by Edmonds yet, but by a group before that. So then, when we did it, it was got very foggy, just in the clouds. It was a very nice day, but for some reason, there were clouds in the highest peaks. So over 5,000 feet. So looking back from Mount Monroe to Eisenhower and Mount Clinton shows you the route that they took. And now you can see this is Mount Monroe, and they came along the Crawford Path here, but it's, once you leave Mount Eisenhower, it's totally exposed. No trees, no paths to skirt the mountain that have any, shelter. So they went along here. There's Lakes of the Clouds. And Curtis, who was the founder of the New York Athletic Club, could move no farther. I just don't think that they appreciated the fact that you can get hypothermia rather quickly. Just 1 degree drop in your temperature can be the beginning of hypothermia, and your mental faculties become impaired earlier, actually, than your extremities. And when your mental faculties are impaired, you don't make good judgment calls. You don't think you need to turn back. So here's the view from Mount Washington, the path they would have taken down Mount Washington to Lakes of the Clouds, and there's the hut. And you can see it. You could either go over Monroe, or you can skirt Monroe, but it's still totally exposed. And then over Mount Franklin, they did go to Mount Eisenhower, and there was some kind of canister up there where they noted it was 60, mile-an-hour winds, very cold. And then all the way over to the beginning, the first mountain. That's Mount Monroe and the hut. The Conch Railroad. Another way to go up Monroe, but I'm not sure that this path was built either. The Ammonoosuc Trail, which is short but very steep, which is why we decided to go up from Eisenhower instead. That's Dave. Probably 40-degree water. There's the hut that got built. As soon as they were killed, they started making plans to build the hut. And this was in June of 1900, and the hut was finally built in 1915. And another party was coming up over the Crawford, the Davis Path, and they backpacked all the way 9.5 miles to the top of Isolation Mountain and had another 5 miles to get to the summit of Mount Washington, but they got up at 5:30 in the morning with only 5 miles to go, luckily, and they just barely made it to the top before. This is the top of Isolation where they camped overnight, and Mount Washington is probably there. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so Cannon Mountain, where the ski trail is. Now this is the other really treacherous area in the Whites, Lincoln and Lafayette. They're 5,000-foot mountains. There they are. And they can be subject to whiteout. There it is again from the other side. They can be subject to whiteout and tremendous winds. And there are 2 trails. One had this dog team. And the other is called the Falling Waters Trail. So I'll show you some of the ways up Mount Lafayette. Now this hut is only a mile from the summit of Lafayette, but one couple went up for a day trip, and they were fairly seasoned mountain climbers, but somehow up there they couldn't find the trail back down because a whiteout had settled in and they got lost, and so they bivouacked. I'll show you where. That's summer approaching. You can see that it wouldn't be all that easy to find your way. And so they found a place to bivouac in the rocks here, near the summit, overnight. Mount Lafayette. And the view from Mount Lafayette to the rest of the range. But the problem is that they had to spend a second night there because they tried to send in rescuers by helicopter and also ground, but it was a total whiteout. The conditions are so terrible that they had to spend a second night in the rocks near Mount Lafayette, and finally one of them died before they could be rescued. So the point is, you just can't. Another couple decided that they would climb, starting on the Falling Waters Trail, going up here first, and one of them ended up dying, and the other lost extremities. Summer path, beautiful. In good weather, it's fabulous. Okay, Mount Liberty. To go back for a minute in wintertime. But you can see it's just a kind of small, open, rocky summit. And there's a sunbather up there. But one man put his dog on a leash in the wintertime just to go over the rocky, smallish summit, to a little precipitous. And then they went over to a nearby mountain flume, that precipitous one you saw. And on the way back, he got the leash out, put on the dog to go over Liberty. And the dog took one look at the leash or one look at Liberty, and he took off so fast that the hiker went back all the way to Flume, the other mountain. Looked for him for an hour, couldn't find him. It was very cold. He finally had to go home without the dog, and it was 0 degrees overnight. And so the next morning early, he got up and climbed again to Liberty here, which is almost 5,000 feet. And he started approaching the summit, and the dog leaped into his arms in the open rocks. just something spooked him. Dogs get very spooked by ladders in the mountains, even, you know, certain kind of small ledges. They don't like. Okay.
I don't know if you can see that sign. This is, what's the, Lonesome Lake. It says, no lifeguard on duty.
Lonesome Lake hut that's not very far up, very, I think maybe open now in the wintertime. Yeah, this is the Kinsman Range across from Lincoln and Lafayette. That's that same lake. Okay, now in Crawford Notch. That's the same big cliff from the next mountain over. And there's the same cliff from the next mountain way down south. And across from Crawford Notch, the cliff, you go from Mount Jackson all the way over the residentials I've just been talking about to Mount Washington. Again, the wind was about, I don't know, 35 to 40 miles an hour. And the bird, this is a Canadian jay. Just, I don't even think the branches were waving around that much. Jay. One of our cold days. A hand of old man winter. Yeah, and this is on Pinkham Notch, which is the eastern notch, and one of the treacherous places. I knew it was very treacherous, and I always refused to go across this slide. If you've ever climbed a slide like Macomb in the Adirondacks, it's very steep. The reason that it's a slide is because vegetation can't hold on, it's so steep, so whenever it gets really soggy and rainy, all of the vegetation can suddenly give way and drop all the way to the bottom. And people fall down this slide, and I knew they would, but I didn't know any facts about it. So I started doing research on it, and found out that indeed 2 people on 2 different occasions had fallen down the slide and gotten quite severely injured, because not only do you fall very fast on the slide, but at the bottom is a cliff. Can't see the corners. Okay. So this is the range, and since I wouldn't go across the slide, we had to hike, you know, all the way over the range and back again over the range, since I wouldn't hike the slide. Anybody see what that is? A moose. On Mount Cabot, halfway up. And we went all the way to the top and back down, and lo and behold, he's still there. By that time, it was getting really snowy and a little dark. This moose was above the Zealand hut, if you're climbing to the Bonds. And the hikers saw this moose up the trail, and they looked at each other for a minute, and then the moose starts down the trail toward them, and the man said, well, maybe we better climb a tree. So they were spruce trees, something you climb. So up the branches they went. They sat there for 45 minutes. It was 0 degrees, and the moose was below them, not moving. And the man thought, maybe our packs are spooking him or something, so I'll run down and get the packs off the trail and see if that will let him move on. And he did, and it did start moving down the trail. But then they could hear other climbers coming up the trail, so they yelled, there's an aggressive moose coming down the trail, you better get in a tree. And so they actually put a big sign at the Zealand hut saying, aggressive moose on the trail.
That's the forest rangers that did that, not Forest Service.
Yeah, the White Mountain Forest Service. So, okay, this is really the farthest point that you can go in the White, so about 9 miles from any trailhead. So this is Twin Mountain over here, a ways off. But when the day we did it, we took a different approach. I just want to put that in, Dave. Next month, next summer. It was like summer. We did it February 5th. And we didn't even carry snowshoes because there was no snow at the base at all. We thought, okay, let's risk it, a very long hike without snowshoes. We can always turn around if we have to. It's like summer. Okay, we finished the 48 on Bond Cliff to the 18-mile round trip. That's Mount Bond Cliff. That's Bond Cliff from Bond. And from West Bond. Okay, a few slides off Maine. The Appalachian Trail. There's the tuba man, Scott Tuba Man Rim Hewitt, his name is. So we thought, okay, we'll hike the Appalachian Trail to the top of Katahdin. We get to a point where you have to climb up holding iron bars. Maybe you want to talk about the people we met coming down.
Well, on the way into that trail, just started off, it was around Labor Day, and two guys coming down saying, "It's too cold." And then we kept on going, and more people came down and said, "It's too windy up there." And then a couple minutes later, two more people said, "It's too rocky." What were they expecting? I don't know.
I see their point is a point. A knife edge. Ooh. It's truly a knife edge. Maybe no wider than the stake. Those are people. Treacherous. You have to go down very steeply off of Chimney Mountain from Pomola. So that's truly treacherous.
By the way, Carol is afraid of heights.
Yeah.
So we didn't do this one.
Yeah, draw the line at something. Take the knife edge. And from the top of Katahdin, Chimney Pond. Okay, so this is what it looks like from satellite, and the dark places are what we're talking about. Where there's very, very little civilization. So when we were doing the 46 in the wintertime, that hail bomb comet was up in the sky, and it would get dark by 5 o'clock or 5:30, and it just hung there in the sky. It doesn't move at all. It was such a wonderful thing to see. Okay, we've got to talk a little bit about the Santanoni Range, which is treacherous because it's well known for, you had Alan Villa speak here last year. He wrote the Catskill 67 about the peaks below 3,500 feet. He was in the Santanoni Range, and he'd been taking pictures all day and not eating or hydrating enough. And so he told his 3 companions to go ahead, go on down to the tent. He'd be down soon. And he found himself flailing around, falling, sometimes head first, and getting to the point where he was beyond tired, totally exhausted. And he said to himself, I'm just going to sit down for a couple of minutes and rest. And he knew that that's a fatal decision that a hypothermic person will do, because you may never get up again. You go to sleep, and they used to call it freezing to death. And so maybe he could have relied in that case on his companions finally deciding, well, Alan isn't back down, so let's go find him. But I mean, that would take time. And he kept going because he had two things. He knew the symptoms of hypothermia, and he had a will to live. And he kept himself moving. And when he finally got to the tent, they said he looked like death. And they brought him in the tent, they stripped his clothes off, and they put him in a sleeping bag, and they gave him, but he couldn't tolerate any food at all, no hot food, until about midnight. So, I mean, hypothermia can kill quite quickly. You have to know all its symptoms. But other than that, we should say that this is famous for frostbite, because this is a picture of me hiking up a brook, Panther Brook, up the San Antonio Range, and I'll let Dave tell the rest of the story.
You know, we had been camping the night before with friends, and you know, hiking up to do San Antonio first, and after taking this marvelous picture, I broke through the brook up to my knees in ice water. And I was too macho and pig-headed. Everybody said, well, you know, change your socks. The technique is to put bread bags over dry socks, because your boots are still going to be wet and would get new socks wet right away. So you use bread bags. Was the biggest loss there. Anyhow, so you never can tell what the conditions are going to, how your body is going to respond to it, whether you're going to get hypothermia or think you're in good shape when you're not.
Well, one thing you do learn that you can't keep your extremities safe in cold, wet conditions. I mean, you have to change out of boots. Extremities will freeze. Okay, just a few places in the Adirondacks. This is where bears gather, and this is where people camp at Lake Holden, and this is the new bear canister that people were supposed to bring. And this bear worked for 45 minutes to open this canister and did not succeed. But there was a bear called Thelma? Let's see, no, there's another one that we saw. Right.
Something yellow.
Yellow, because he was marked with yellow, that did actually manage to open one of these canisters. A little bit of nutrition. This Marcy Dam, the other place where the bears congregate. This is what it looked like from Marcy Dam, but apparently that's gone. Okay, so this shows where we camped. Down there is the big camping ground between Lake Holden and Floodlands. So we decided to do a winter expedition to climb Redfield, Cliff, Skylight, and Gray. And there's a lean-to in there where we camped.
University of Vermont Outing Club was in there the week before us, and they built this igloo. And I always wanted to see what it was like from the inside. So there's the view from the igloo.
Between Marcy and Skylight, 4 corners. Yeah. And there we saw that very cute pine marten. Now there's a typical whiteout on Skylight. Unfortunately, the weather was bad. It was really good going in, really good going out. And like this, the day we hiked, I just want to tell them on Skylight that the party did not stay together, as you're supposed to hike. You know, you start as a group, hike as a group. But some people got ahead, and this woman was left behind, and she learned to make holes in the snow with her ski pole to guide her, you know, in case the same thing happened on the way down. But Guy Waterman says the better thing, make holes with ice axes, because it doesn't blow away as fast. Your crampons will blow away, crampon marks will blow right away. Okay, canisters were removed from the Adirondacks in 2001. This is on Gray Peak, just off Marcy. And this is one of the notorious peaks where you can see it would be buried quite often a foot or more under the snow. Okay. And so, and also on Gray Peak, one of the big differences between climbing in the White and climbing in the Adirondacks is the Adirondacks has these 19 trailless peaks, where the Whites, you could say, on trails for all of them. And you fall into these spruce traps. That's another thing. Oh, that a 6-foot hiker woman, friend of ours, fell into a spruce trap on Gray Peak and kept sinking down and down with the snow well over her head. And she was too tall, she couldn't reach down to take her snowshoes off and extricate herself. And so she talked about how the geezer gang came up with the 70-pound rule. They'd come back and get you when you were down to 70 pounds and could carry you out. And back on Santoni, it's another notorious place for spruce traps. Tom Sawyer, very aptly named, is the only person who will climb all 3,000-foot mountains in New York and New England in the winter. And he and his wife were climbing the Santoni Range with another couple, and they got into a spruce trap. The two women got into a spruce trap that ended up being 7 feet wide and 3 feet deep. It took them an hour to get out of the spruce trap, because every time you go over to the edge, try to get out, you're on another spruce and it gives way.
I think that was 30 by 7.
30. Oh, yes.
30 by 7. That's
30 by 7. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Oops. So catch this in the summer, and there's the same boulder in the winter.
Holden.
What is a spruce trap?
Spruce trap is caused by you're off trail and you're in this very thick spruce forest, and the branches spread out, and the whole thing, they're small, at that height, they're very small, and so they're completely buried, or almost completely buried, and you step onto this minefield of teeny spruces, and you fall down through the top branch into the next branch with all the air pockets. And you keep falling down through more air pockets, and you can't get out necessarily because it's thick, and you'll just get into another spruce next door, and that's what happened. It was 30 feet by 7 feet deep, a crater that was created by trying to struggle out. So, okay, down here is a lake, Avalanche Lake, down 1,900 feet from Mount Holden, down the slide. Here's the slide, and there at the bottom is
The Hitch Up Matildas, which you probably know about. Before there were trails like this and the bridges, there were guides that would carry their parties, women in long skirts, through the water to get along the lake. And the story goes that a husband and wife the wife was being carried by the guide and her skirts were getting into the water, and he said, "Hitch up, Matilda." And the name is now applied to the bridges that were made to replace the guides.
There it is, the whole, it's about half a mile along here. They have these wonderful bridges and ladders. Dogs do not like ladders. That's another thing dogs don't like, because we forget the fact that they don't have hands to grasp, you know.
But they do have four-wheel drive.
And one time we saw a man carrying his English sheepdog up this steep ladder. You probably know about the Trap Dyke. The Trap Dyke is at Avalanche Lake below Mount Holden, and there are many deaths here. People like to go up the Trap Dyke, but it looks fairly benign. You just kind of crawl up, you know, you just kind of hike up the rocks, but at a certain point up there, yeah, there it is in the wintertime, we skied up there. At a certain point, you reach, boy, these are big pictures. This is the wall of the Trap Dyke. huge walls, to get up toward, up high. And all of a sudden, you're on very treacherous ledges where you can't necessarily see where you're going to put your feet next. I mean, you've got to maneuver over to another area without being able to see exactly where you're going to put your feet, and handholds and footholds. And not very long ago, somebody from the University of Binghamton was leading a hike there, and he started to help somebody around these kind of treacherous areas, and he lost his grip and fell 20 feet, instantly killed. It's very dangerous. And it goes up almost to this trail from Lake Arnold to Mount Colden. Some same scenes, winter and summer. Okay, look at the McIntyre Range. Wright, there's Wright Peak. You probably hiked some of these. Wright Peak, Algonquin, Boundary, Iroquois. I just took the shots of them from other places. This is a shot from Skylight. There's Mount Colden. There's a new slide that you can climb up, well, relatively new that you can climb up, although it's incredibly steep. And one time we did it when it was raining and very wet, and we got up to here and we tried to climb across here, and we thought to ourselves, one reason the slide is created is it created in very wet conditions like this, where the ground suddenly gives way, and it goes 500 feet down, and here we are, that high up, trying to cross a little teeny patch of grass, and thought this is not a very safe thing to do. So there's the Algonquin, Boundary, Iroquois, and just remember that little knob right there. It's called Shepherd's Tooth. And this is the range, Algonquin, Boundary, Iroquois, from Street, which is a trailless peak near the Adirondack Lodge. And there it is from Redfield, on the brook up Redfield, where several people have fallen in. We know personally 3 instances of where people fell. This is the top of a 60-foot waterfall. And if you approach a waterfall or a cascade, you think that the brook is icy, no problem. But these 3 parties of people had somebody break through the ice, go in up to their knees or hips, not touching bottom, and this woman that we know quite well could not extricate herself from the water, and the man that she was with couldn't get her out either, because if you go too close to the edge of the ice, you yourself are going to fall in. But there were 2 other people that were exploring other herd paths, and they came back down, and some of the 3 of them were able to get sufficiently around the hole to drag her out. But you're 7 miles from the nearest trailhead, and they had to get her clothes off and get her boots and try to keep her warm, and got some frostbite. So anyway, they're in winter, Algonquin, Boundary, Iroquois, and there's the Shepherd's Tooth. So this is their climb of Wright, which is pretty accessible, not that far from the Adirondack Lodge. Nice view of crampons. And we were talking.
We were at the lodge one day, and it was drizzly and horrible looking. And we thought, well, we're here, we might as well hike anyhow. And we started to go up Wright Peak. And when we got to 4,000 feet, we got above the clouds. And everybody in Lake Placid was cussing the horrible day. Yeah. But as you will see, we had a marvelous one.
Yeah, so there's Algonquin, and suddenly there we are above the clouds. It's incredible. White face and just a few of the high peaks. That's probably giant. And there's the Great Range. They're sticking up. Yeah, there's Gothics. And that might be Big Slide. Moon rising. Had to put this in.
Ditch. Had to try to dry off my clothes.
No, I want him to go back because I want to hear the story of that.
All right. So I knew that nobody would be climbing Wright Peak in this horrible, humid, hot weather. And all of a sudden we heard woof, woof, woof. And I knew that the dog wasn't coming by himself. Well, it was a high school principal. So I got detention that day.
But it was really interesting. He'd gained a lot of weight. He said to us, I've gained, not Dave, but the high school principal, because he'd been working on his PhD and he'd gained about 100 pounds. But he, was still hiking, and he told us about this is our very first hike by ourselves in the Adirondacks. And he told us about all these trails, like the Ridge Trail, the Giant. We thought, boy, we got to do this. And that's where Jim got into trouble. We can't even see the whole thing. We did the Algonquin in a whiteout. It just shows a total whiteout where you can't see a thing in a whiteout. So Algonquin. In between Algonquin and Boundary. And here's the view from Boundary back to Algonquin. And the view from Boundary to Iroquois. And there's Wall Face. Dave, go back just a minute. It's really beautiful. Beautiful slide. Yeah, there's Wall Face. There's that's the San Bernardino Range, isn't it? Is that San Bernardino Pampa? There is Shepherd's Tooth at the far side of Iroquois. So you climb down, and you've done Algonquin, Boundary, Iroquois, and you go down the rock, and soon you're at this Shepherd's Tooth.
When we were doing the 46 in very, very late 80s, when the canisters were there were pencils in the canisters to write in the logbook, and one guy was always putting in his own personal pencils saying, on to Shepherd's Tooth. And you could, if you got there was a little canister on Shepherd's Tooth, and you could write in saying that you were there, and it would give you a special patch just for Shepherd's Tooth.
Okay, and then if you kept going on the McIntyre Range to Marshall, and that's looking back at Iroquois and how steep that is. And one time we came across, and we literally bushwhacked. This is part of Marshall at Falls Peak. We climbed along this incredibly steep area to the point where you had to keep going up or down just to find a place that you could stand in order to get to the high point between the mountains. And when we finally got there, it was a foot underwater. We thought, we've finally gotten to the trail. And literally, you're walking through slush, and you can't see where you're putting your feet. And suddenly you step off a rock, and you're up to your thighs in slush, and you're 6 miles from the trailhead. And you start thinking, maybe I've really made a bad mistake now. And you leap out of it, and you have some lunch, which you haven't done yet. And then suddenly, the reason you're out here, this is the first trailless peak we ever tried, and the reason you're doing it is because it's 50 degrees. It's been a week-long thaw in mid-January. So we think, good, this is a good time to do Marshall. It's like a 14-mile round trip in winter. Well, okay, so we finally got all the way down to the interior outpost at Lake Holden. And we started talking to the ranger, and we said, boy, we don't know about this winter 46. And he said, I think the summer 46 is worse, because people come completely unprepared. They don't know that you lose, 3 to 5 degrees for every 1,000 feet that you ascend. They don't know that they're vast open summits, great wind, and they get in tremendous trouble.
We were in wool pants, and standing out on the, once you got wet, if you got out of the water, you warmed right back up again. Whereas if you're in cotton, forget it.
Yeah, don't wear cotton. So just doing the Great Range, this is, okay. Wolfjaw Armstrong, Gothic, somebody had to bivouac, because these, just leave it on there for a second, that they're very close together. And so they look very doable. Oh, it's just another mile from Lower to Upper Wolfjaw, and another mile from Upper Wolfjaw to Gothics here, or Armstrong. And so they ran out of daylight, and they had just started doing the Winter 46, and they didn't have a flashlight, so they bushwhacked down, following a stream, but they know they're not going to make it out for the night, so they start digging a snow cave. They know that the weather forecast said it's going to be 20 below, 40 below, and we read newspaper accounts of this, and it was 40 below zero along the lakes. So they did dig a little bit, and then they burned a map to get a fire going, and managed somehow to get through the night, and get to the rescuers that were forming in Keene Valley just before they left to find them. Gothics. And the cable route to Gothics. And this is Pyramid as you're going to the south face of Gothics. And somebody called this God's front porch, the summit of Gothics. It is absolutely beautiful. I think it's the best view in the center of the high peaks. And that's Gothics from Saddleback. And really, just hold on there, the worst thing that happened in my books is that somebody fell 60 feet off a cliff from Saddleback. And this is February, and who's going to be between, way out in the Great Range in February. And luckily there were two men that were descending Saddleback at the same time and passed them as they were struggling to get to the top of Saddleback. And they were camping down below, and she fell 60 feet, had multiple injuries, somehow got her into the tent, into the sleeping bag, and she had to be helicoptered out the next day, and they said, well, given your injuries, probably a sling would be better. So she said, okay. And she gets into the sling, and she realizes that it offers only leg support, but no arm support, and that she has no use for her right arm, so she has to hold on with one arm and be drawn up 200 feet into the helicopter. Had to dig deep to find that strength. Those are the cliffs of Saddleback, where there's really no very good route. There. In wintertime, it's treacherous. And Little Haystack, it's 4,500 feet, not so little. And it drops, as you can see, it drops about 500 feet straight off. So if you're coming down here and it's extremely windy, and one time a woman almost was finishing her Winter 46 on Haystack, and the leader, the Rochester Winter Mountaineering leader, whose bottom line decision is it, said, we can't get down Little Haystack safely, and we're turning back, even though it was her 46th winter peak. So, turn back. Marcy in December.
This was on Christmas Day, and it was really our second day of winter hiking in the Adirondacks. And a couple was coming down from the summit of Marcy as we were going up. Obviously, they had a little ceremony together up there on the summit.
Okay, well, there's Little Haystack, 4,500, Haystack, 4,900. And right down here, in August of 2009, we came across a woman that was lying on the ground. And lo and behold, she could not stand or walk. And she had detached a ligament and was completely incapacitated. And I carry a 24/7 DEC phone number. So we called and talked to a ranger who arranged for a helicopter rescue for this woman. And they were literally wearing just practically no gear, just very summer, what? They had no warm gear. And we knew they'd have to sit there on the open summit of Marcy, which can get very cold for who knows how long till a helicopter could get there and get them out of there. And so we gave them all the clothes in our pack, and it's 7 miles back to the trailhead. And we got down to Indian Falls, and we heard, and that's 4 miles from the trailhead, and we heard the helicopter coming over to rescue them, so that's very fast. And then we got down to the trail that goes up to Phelps, and the helicopter went over with her in it. And
We got back down to the ADK campground, and she was in the campground with her already taken care of foot in a cast, elevated, drinking a glass of wine. She got down there before we did.
immobilized. This is Round Pond on the trip to Dix. Dix is the 5th highest peak. There it is. The view from Nippletop to Dix. And there's the Beckhorn on Dix. And there's Macomb Mountain with 3 characteristic summits. And East Dix from the Beckhorn. And somebody decided, okay, they're going to do the Dix Range, so they did, let's see, Dix and, let's see, South Dix and East Dix, and then they descended below the slides on East Dix, and she's walking across a stream. 2 people went across a log before her, and on the log she slipped off and got a torn meniscus, and absolutely tried to move and moved a little bit, but somebody had to hike bushwhack. It's complete bushwhack, 5 miles out to get a rescue. And so the rescue finally came at 2 in the morning. This happened about 5 o'clock. It was in March. And it was very, very cold. That's the East Dix slides. There's Macomb again. Strange summits. And there's a slide coming up Macomb. You usually get to the top of Macomb climbing the slide. You know, in the wintertime it can be treacherous. It's hard to convey how very steep that is. I mean, that's really steep, big slide mountain.
This was our 46th peak. He was Huff, one of the trailless ones back then. And I carried 46 shrimp. Chilled shrimp, obviously. And cocktail sauce.
We had a large party. A whiteout. Woo. Okay, Giant. I just wanted to put the Giant in because Jim had a bad time. It still has effects. Okay, well, he hiked up the Ridge Trail, beautiful open rock, but sprained your ankle, right? Huh. We met a flute player and spent the whole weekend with him. And this is the way to Giant over there, up Bald Mountain and Rocky Peak Ridge. And they had Mother's Day on Rocky Peak Ridge. And let's see, it was in 2007 that we celebrated the 60th anniversary of Grace Wawalski, who was the 50-year historian of the 46ers, doing all 46.
The club put 1 member on each one of the peaks in her honor.
Okay, we just have like 10 more slides. Just dangerous places where people fall off the waterfall. Catskill Falls. That's 170, just back there, just 175-foot cataract and 85-foot cataract, and you're not supposed to climb up, but people do all the time. Giant Ledge, somebody fell down through a crack in the wintertime and hung upside down looking at the trees below, 200 feet below, and somehow managed to get himself up and out of there, but treacherous. This is the Cornell Crack.
When people saw this picture in the book, they said, I recognize that person.
And people get torn meniscuses and all kinds of problems trying to get off of the Cornell Crack. Okay, this is Blackhead, where people 4 years ago exactly, in the wintertime, were killed. Now, it looks so benign, it is so benign and beautiful. It's almost 4,000 feet high, Blackhead Mountain, beautiful views, but, okay, there's Black Dome, which is 3980 feet. And here's the summit of Blackhead, the moon, and they just simply, go back just 1 second, they simply went the wrong way on the escarpment trail, and they found themselves like 2.8 miles down the wrong way, and their lean-to was the Batavia Hill lean-to, which is only less than a mile down, and they had to dig a snow cave, and they survived that night, but then they began getting the effects of hypothermia so that they were unable to put their snowshoes on them. That you can lose the use of your extremities completely, which is what happened. And so one of them was killed. A lot of plane wrecks in the Catskills. This is right on the trail above North Point, above North South Lake campground. And this is right on the snowmobile trail of Catskill High Peak. And this is on the escarpment trail above Boulder Rock near the north-south, near the Catskill Mountain House site. And this is on Wright Peak. Let's leave that for just a second. Yeah, when that occurred in 1962, I think. Yeah. And it usually happens in whiteout conditions. Oops. Well, I guess that may be part of, no, that's a bear print. Yeah. I was hiking up Bearpen Mountain by myself to meet Dave, who was taking a crew up another trail, and came across these big bear prints. Another one. Oh, can't see that very well. Whoa, it's too big. That's a bear print.
This is a place called Dibble's Quarry, and our friend there with the dog, Heather, started a fundraiser called Gowns for Greenbacks. And she and Danielle, over here on the right, climbed all 35 peaks in ball gowns. And boots. This is a balanced rock on
Pitch-Off Mountain, across from Cascade and the Adirondacks.
So for somebody who's afraid of heights, I don't know. And finally, down in the Catskills, this is our summer home. If you believe that, I have a castle for you to buy. So that's it, and I know we've run very long, but if you want to come up and ask questions, we'll be happy to talk to you for a while.